Imagine if an AI could hack into your bank account just by reading a text message, and it's not science fiction. That's exactly what the EU is now worried about with advanced AI models like Mythos. These aren't your basic chatbots. They're AI systems that can think, learn, and even predict human behavior with terrifying accuracy. The European Union is now pushing the US to talk about how to control these powerful AI models. And it's not just about regulations. It's about stopping a potential cyber war. Mythos AI, for example, is so advanced that it can simulate human conversations, bypass security systems, and even create fake identities in seconds. The EU is saying that if these models fall into the wrong hands, they could be used to steal sensitive data, manipulate global markets, or even launch cyberattacks on critical infrastructure. And here's where it gets interesting. The EU isn't just talking about this. They're actively pushing the US to address it, and the stakes are higher than you might think. So, what exactly is Mythos AI, and why is it causing such a big stir in Washington and Brussels? Let's dive deeper. Mythos AI isn't just another AI model. It's a breakthrough in machine learning that can think and act like a human, but with superhuman speed and accuracy. Imagine an AI that can write a full email in seconds, predict the next move of a chess player, or even understand the nuances of a conversation better than most humans. That's what Mythos can do. It's being developed by a mix of private companies and research institutions, and its capabilities are growing faster than most people expect. The EU is now concerned that if these models aren't properly regulated, they could be used for cyber attacks that are nearly impossible to detect. The problem isn't just with Mythos, though. Other AI models like GPT-5 and others are also being used in ways that weren't originally intended. The EU is saying that the US needs to step up and work with them to create a framework that can prevent these models from being weaponized. But here's the twist. The US isn't always on the same page when it comes to AI regulation. So, what's the real reason the EU is pushing so hard for these talks? Let's find out. To understand why the EU is so worried about Mythos AI, you need to know how it actually works. Think of it like a supercharged version of a language model, but instead of just understanding words, it can learn from vast amounts of data and generate responses that are almost indistinguishable from a real person. It uses a technique called deep learning, which means it trains on massive data sets, including text, images, and even videos. This allows Mythos to mimic human behavior in real time, making it extremely useful for things like customer service, content creation, or even research. But the same power that makes it useful also makes it dangerous. If someone uses Mythos to create fake news, impersonate a CEO, or even hack into a government system, the consequences could be catastrophic. The EU is saying that without proper safeguards, these models could be used for cyber attacks that are nearly impossible to detect or stop. And that's exactly why they are pushing the US to talk about it. But here's the thing. The US isn't the only country with access to these models. So, how can the EU ensure that they're not being used for malicious purposes? Let's look at some real-world examples. Let's take a look at some real-world examples of how Mythos AI is being used, both for good and for bad. On the positive side, companies are using it to automate customer service, create marketing content, and even help doctors diagnose diseases faster. It's like having a super smart assistant that never sleeps and can process information in seconds. But on the flip side, there are already reports of Mythos being used to create deepfakes that look and sound like real people. These deepfakes have been used to spread misinformation, manipulate stock markets, and even impersonate high-profile individuals. In one case, a hacker used a version of Mythos to create a fake video of a CEO announcing a merger, and it was so realistic that it almost fooled investors. The EU is saying that if these models continue to be used in this way, they could be the next big threat in the cyber world. And here's the kicker. The same AI that can help doctors save lives can also be used to steal medical records or launch cyber attacks on hospitals. So, how can we prevent this from happening? Let's explore what the EU is proposing. The EU and the US have very different approaches when it comes to AI regulation, and that's a big part of why the EU is now pushing for talks with the US. The EU has been much more proactive in creating laws that protect people from the potential misuse of AI. For example, they've already passed laws that require companies to be transparent about how their AI models work and who they are trained on. The US, on the other hand, has been more focused on encouraging innovation rather than regulation. This has led to a situation where US companies are developing some of the most powerful AI models in the world, but there are very few rules in place to prevent them from being used for malicious purposes. The EU is saying that this is a problem because if the US doesn't regulate AI properly, the rest of the world could be at risk. But here's the thing, the US isn't the only country with access to these models. So, what's the real reason the EU is pushing so hard for these talks? Let's find out. The stakes for the EU and the US in these talks are huge, and it's not just about AI regulation. If the EU and the US can't agree on how to control advanced AI models like Mythos, it could lead to a global cyber arms race. Imagine a world where countries start developing their own AI models for cyber warfare and no one is in control of how they are used. That's exactly what the EU is trying to prevent. They are saying that without international cooperation, these models could be used for things like hacking into power grids, stealing sensitive data, or even launching attacks on critical infrastructure. The implications are huge, and they could affect everyone from governments to everyday people. For example, if a cyber attack were to shut down a power grid, it could leave millions of people without electricity for days. And that's just one of the many risks. But here's the twist. The EU isn't just talking about this. They're actively pushing the US to address it. So, what's the real reason the EU is pushing so hard for these talks? Let's find out. So, what can you do to protect yourself from AI-powered cyber threats? First, make sure your passwords are strong and unique for every account. Use a password manager to keep track of them. Second, enable two-factor authentication wherever possible. It adds an extra layer of security that can stop hackers even if they get your password. Third, be cautious about sharing personal information online, especially on social media. Hackers can use AI to create fake profiles and trick you into giving away sensitive data. Fourth, keep your software and devices updated. Many cyber attacks exploit known vulnerabilities that could have been fixed with an update. And finally, be wary of unsolicited messages or emails that ask for personal information. They could be AI-generated scams. Staying informed is also important. Follow news about AI and cybersecurity to understand the latest threats and how to protect yourself. The EU and the US are working to create a framework that will help prevent AI from being used for cyber attacks, but it's up to all of us to stay vigilant. So, what's the real reason the EU is pushing so hard for these talks? Let's find out. The EU's push for talks with the US on advanced AI models like Mythos is a sign that the world is finally starting to take AI seriously, and not just for its potential to change the world for the better. The risks of these models being used for cyber attacks are real, and the EU is saying that without international cooperation, the consequences could be catastrophic. But this isn't just about regulation. It's about creating a future where AI is used responsibly and safely. The EU and the US have different approaches to AI, and that's why the EU is now pushing for talks. They want to find a way to work together to create a framework that can prevent these models from being weaponized. The stakes are high, and the outcome of these talks could shape the future of AI for years to come. Whether it's about protecting people, businesses, or even entire countries, the decisions made now will have a lasting impact. So, what's the real reason the EU is pushing so hard for these talks? The answer is simple: because the future of AI depends on it.